you very much, Alistair. Can I just suggest that folk might like to clear the food off the table, at least someone can sit on the table. It's very embarrassing speaking here at what will be modest length, but nevertheless length, and thinking that folk have to stand all the way through it. And there's always the floor. I've always found it quite, well, it's probably too immodest here, but when I speak, I've spoken a couple of times at the Foreign Affairs Department, and the Gareth Evans lecture theatre did not take the numbers, but it was okay because the kids all came and sat on the floor around the speaker, and that worked quite well. Some of the folk at the back that were not applied to, but others might like to mention more. Look, and before I get into the main topic, I just want to thank you all for being members of the Institute and supporting it. You don't actually lead the Institute from Canberra or the National Presidency. The simple fact of the matter is that we are a perfect confederation. And each of the units of the Institute basically function autonomously and function well. And organise their own programs, do all their own thing. And that is a model which works superbly. At the centre, I guess, we're sort of responsible for the Institute Journal and the Australian Outlook website. But they function actually independently of the President too. They have committees attached to them. The Journal is one of the best international relations journals in the world. And it has a system of peer review and an editorial board to match that. And so that is really extracted from the normal operations of the Institute, where we, myself included, might not really be of a standard of professionalism to justify the capacity of the journal to operate in the way in which it does. So that is, we are successful because we are dispersed. And of course, when you are dispersed, it really puts a lot of pressure on the committee members and members of the diverse branches. So this has, for years and years, been a superb location for the discussion of Australian foreign policy. At its outset, it was the only place you could discuss Australian foreign policy. Things have changed a bit since then, but nevertheless, the Institute has always moved with the times. So thank you for that, and thank you for the efforts that you put in, and thank you for the people who have organised today's events, which I can see must have produced a record crowd, because if this was what would happen to you as a member of the Institute in normal circumstances, then be all right. And we want bigger premises, we'll knock out a wall, we'll do something like that. But there we are. Actually, I'm probably not going to speak quite as advertised, though I will definitely take questions along those lines, because I think people are less interested in what might happen after Trump, as opposed to whether there'll be a Trump. And so I think I will talk mainly about that, but I will very briefly, for the first 4 or 5 minutes, say what is at stake for us. Because there's a couple of things that surprise me about the state of our knowledge and focus when we consider the character of our relationship with the United States. Most of the coverage, including the people who are quite deeply well read in the character of relationships in our region, do rather tend to see the US lines in one-dimensional and old-fashioned terms. And the debate that you see, I remember the late Malcolm Fraser's book, really is talking about a time long past. And there is there's a sort of, and part of it is because an awful lot of it is so secret. An awful lot of the technologies are, necessarily held in a clandestine way, that you don't actually see the real operation of the relationship now. That's the first point. The second point is, our focus is so heavily on what you might call our comprador capitalist activities, or has been, over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. The massive export of minerals and energy to China in particular, and Asia in general, with a huge price received in return. And that has become the focal point of our outlook on the international economy, And even though that era is now past completely, the overhang of the political dynamic associated with it has probably assigned care and nurturing of the Chinese relationship a higher level of priority now in our political debates as well as our economic debates than it deserves. The future of our employment lies essentially in advanced services and advanced manufacturing. And whereas Western Australia, my home state, and Queensland have been the major drivers of the Comprador era, the major drivers of the new era will be Sydney and Melbourne, and to a lesser extent Adelaide and Brisbane. So there's we've not reached the political consciousness that this set of circumstances would normally drive. But we'll get there over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, and it'll change somewhat the character of our outlook. On the alliance thing, and then on the economic thing, just to say briefly this. When I was the Defence Minister, the joint facilities, for example, were the source of my part and my heart of me not lying to the Labor Party. So when I said we had full knowledge and consent, I would mean it even if I couldn't exactly explain how. I had to, in my own mind, retain a sense of personal integrity. So when I stood up at Labor Party conferences and said to members of the left, generally from Victoria, that this was the truth, I at least needed to know it was the truth. So we renegotiated the treaties, and the way we made it the truth was in the joint facilities. We made sure that there were Australians on every shift and that we commanded half of them. That we not only believed that we understood what was going on from the basis of the reportage, but we understood it simply because we were there. And so the objective then was to make sure we understood what the Americans are doing. As I got rebriefed in as ambassador, it became clear to me that the relationship between ourselves and the Americans in the joint facilities, and they now include new ones, mostly situated in West Australia for space surveillance. It's a new generation of them. The idea that we were in effect spying on or managing the Americans has long since gone. The joint facilities now are as intricate a part of the Australian order of battle as they are of the American, and that's all there is to it. They happen to be joint facilities. We use them as much as the Americans. They are crucial for our information, our operational information, as well as our strategic understanding for us as they are for the Americans. We are now seamless. And when you switch over to our items of equipment, the same story arises. Then we had choices. We could choose whether or not we'd have a Canberra bomber, or we'd have a French Mirage, or there's a range of these items of equipment for our frontline equipment. You cannot do anything like that unless you want to waste money now. Fundamentally, there's an arms race in the Southeast Asian area, and our only chance is to maintain a technological edge. Our only capacity to sustain a technological edge is that we have an item of equipment that is dominant, and when an Australian pilot gets into the seat, he or she will see what an American pilot would see when they're in the same item of equipment. We are the only country, apart from the United States, effectively, which operates, for example, the Growler variant of the Super Hornet. We're the only one who can. Because we can guarantee that the Australian pilot will be able to operate the most sensitive American technologies. We now spend $13 million a working day in US defence industries. And so the notion that we could conceivably be defended in any circumstances outside the American alliance is simply a nonsense. And one of the reasons I so fear Trump is that he'll make that argument so complicated for those of us who have to defend that position here in Australia. And then you go over to the economic side, hitherto dominated by discussion of our exports to China, when in fact that's just selling things. Investment is forever. Well, it's not necessarily forever, but investment shows a depth of commitment that is simply not there on the sale of a widget. And the simple fact of the matter is now that our mutual investment with the United States is 1.3 trillion. Our own investment in the United States as part of that is now 550 billion. Our investment in China would be about 10. And that investment is mainly portfolio investment. People who manage our superannuation funds have a lot of trouble working out where to place it because we do not have enough to invest on domestically. So we invest in the United States. So our portfolio investment in the United States is the dominant portion of that 550 billion. But increasingly direct investment is becoming a component of that. And there are now some 10,000 Australian firms which do business in the United States, many of them now with production facilities or complex outlets. The future in supply chains and in niches, which will keep our manufacturing industry going, is the United States. You could not possibly do this with China, you'd lose your IP instantly. Simple fact of the matter. It's like inescapable. There's no point in worrying about it, it just happens. And the only place you have that protected is in the United States. Even Europe and certainly the rest of Asia is pretty iffy. When I got there as ambassador, there's a case going on that ultimately ended up in the US Supreme Court, starting in the Texas Supreme Court, ended up in the US Supreme Court. Australia, or CSIRO, as you know, invented Wi-Fi. An American firm stole it without the payment of royalties or anything else. And we were taking action in the US legal system when I got there. We won in the US Supreme Court 9-0. They were, the judges gave them a backside kicking like you wouldn't believe and took very substantial sums off them. A few months later, somebody was trying to exit our jurisdiction in a disagreement they had with NAB and trying to have their fight with NAB in the American jurisdiction. That got to the Supreme Court. 9-0, the US Supreme Court told the bloke to take a hike, go back to Australia where they said banking regulation was at least as good as that in the United States, and that's where the issue ought to be resolved. You see, what does that mean? It means you operate in the United States, protection. You've got a good idea and you operate in the United States, protection. So if you devise here, you've got outfits here in Victoria like Moran, who are now big suppliers to the F-35 aircraft. They do their stuff over in the United States, everything they do is protected, and they know that they can confidently invest and confidently be part of that supply chain, because operating in the United States, you've got a prospect. If we ever have a manufacturing industry, now the government's decided to get rid of the car industry, and given that basically if we don't do anything else, we invest in South Australia and not here, then fundamentally your best chance of a decent manufacturing industry in Victoria is the linkages that you establish with the US. So there we are. That's the picture. It's not a picture that is ever presented here in the media, but that is the picture which is at risk in the Trump presidency. That would create a set of political issues in Asia which would probably be almost impossible for us to contain. So now it brings us to talking about where we're at, how we got to where we are with Mr. Trump and where we might go. You're witnessing a lot of, if you understand it and interpret it properly, a lot of the dynamics around the Trump presidential candidacy now in what you see before the Republican convention. You see Republican holdouts. There are two types of, or there's three types of Republicans now. A larger proportion of them who would not attend this Republican gathering, do not believe that Trump is a Republican, who do not believe that it's in the interests of the Republican Party to have him as a candidate. So like the Senator from Arizona has said that he will not be attending this particular gathering, he will be mowing his lawn. The Senator from Montana has said he'll be fly fishing. And various other members of the Republican congressional delegation all had their reasons. And the governor of Ohio, who normally one would expect to be around a convention of his party, refuses to attend the Republican convention. That's one type of Republican. Then there's the other type of Republican, and that is the ordinary white working man and some women who actually gave the Trump his majority. There are not actually many of them at the Republican convention. Because you see, it works in an odd way. You vote for who your state will support, but only in a few cases are you actually voting for a team. You're voting for an individual. The team is selected at the conventional state convention of the Republican Party, and they are your normal Republicans. But when they go to the convention, they basically have to, on the first ballot, put up their hands for Trump and make the best of him that they can. So a lot of the people that you see on the floor there are not really Trumpers. What you see on the floor are conventional Republicans trying to find a reason for being there when so many are not. Well, the reason for being there, they decide, is not so much to boost a positive agenda for Trump on jobs or anything else, but is to boost their hatred. And if you're talking about firsts, it's the first time I've ever seen, and that was yesterday, a chant go up on the floor when the opponent is discussed, as she is discussed virtually in every speech. A chant goes up, kill her, kill her, kill her. And though no speaker from the podium is invited to vote to shoot Hilary, the speakers on the podium were all jail her, jail her, jail her. What this was is an apotheosis of the Republicans, a sort of a moment in which they said, why are we here? Well, we're not here actually for Trump, we're here to kill Hilary. That's why we want to be here. And then there's the third type of Republican who's there. And those are those like the first type, but they decided to turn up. And Mitch McConnell was their man yesterday, and he is the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, who loathes Trump. But he stood up and said, the reason I'm here, the reason we're here is the Supreme Court. Now this just does not resonate in Australia. We don't have political appointments. We have a few, but hardly any. And we wouldn't dare do a political appointment to the High Court here unless the person who happened to be a Labor Party or Liberal Party person was at the same time an excellent judicial figure. But in the United States, it's politics first. And we still have not replaced the late Judge Scalia. And likely there'll be two Liberal and one Conservative judge resign or leave or die during the course of the next presidential term. The opportunity is there for either the Conservative side or the Liberal side to appoint 4 50-year-olds to the job. And for either the Conservatives or the Liberal side to run the Supreme Court, a length of time that would take out even the younger people here at this gathering. And McConnell realises that, which is why McConnell was there, trying to boost at least the campaign for Republican senators so they don't lose control of the Senate, which has to ratify whatever appointment is made by Trump. Because you see, what do all these people understand? I understand that what I used to mock my Republican friends with last week when I was back in the States, for the first time since 1856, there is no Republican candidate for president. Trump became a Republican when he registered his slogan immediately after the last presidential election and shifted his registration from Democrat to Republican. Here is Trump's positions. Let's take aside the race, the vicious attacks on migrants, on illegals, on Muslims. Set that to one side, and that's a big thing to set aside. But let's just, for the argument's sake, set it to one side. What are his other positions? All his other positions are not only to the left of Hillary Clinton, they're to the left of Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders and Clinton say, you know, we ought to sort of renegotiate the trade agreements, but, you know, most of them we live with and we'll make certain that in the future we do a better job. That's the Sanders-Clinton position. The Trump position is to collapse every trade agreement. He panders to the idea that we're out of the trade business, out of free trade. Whack a 45% tariff on the Chinese. That happens to be the most important economic relationship globally, and that would screw Asia if that position was actually put in place. The United States is the importer of last resort. The entirety of Asia, there's no prosperity here if that situation is not obtained. He does it on the Mexicans. Little does he realise that of a car which comes out of Mexico to the United States, about 60% of its value, the parts that are produced in the United States and then sent to Mexico, that'll be something you have to work on when it comes down to looking at the particular tariff barrier that he intends to put on there. But that is to the left of the progressives in the Democratic Party. That's his position. Then it comes to the question of American alliances, about which he does not give a damn. He talks now about the idea that we're all right, I'm prepared to talk to them all about how they can upgrade their payments to us for what it is that they do in their alliances. Before that, that's one of his modifications. He shifted his position. Before that, his position was collapse, and I really don't care. He said if the Japanese and the Koreans decide they'll develop a nuclear weapon, good luck to them. That'll be an excellent thing. And, you know, if a nuclear war breaks out, I'm sure we'll all be sad. But nevertheless, that was his position on alliances is somewhere around about where this character Browder, who used to be head of the American Communist Party and occasionally ran for president of the United States, it's about where he was back in the day when it comes to alliance positions. The Republicans, of course, and here you meet a bit of disapproval, are very strong on the idea that the US ought to be able to pay for its social security system by serious reforms that will ensure that the funding is kept up. Trump's position is I'm not going to threaten social security. We're not going to bother with doing any of that. And as far as I'm concerned, you deserve a decent retirement. And you know, I don't know where the funds will come from, but we'll do the best we can. And then it comes to the question of minimum wages. The Republican position is to resist that, arguing that, you know, you generate a situation which lessens the number of jobs. I mean, these are arguments that you oppose, I would oppose anyway. But nevertheless, what Trump says now, I'd double up on what's being offered at the moment. So when you go through the litany, there is not a single Republican position that he adopts anywhere. So you have now Hilary as the centre candidate, the centre-right candidate in this election, Trump as the left wing. But you can be guaranteed that the racial issues will substantially cloud the underpinning reality. And so the conversation will be more about the criminal justice system, about police forces, about and so on. That he has come to this point, that if people are prepared to countenance this, is really a product, in the first instance, of a collapse of respect for American institutions over the last 30 years. I'll go through a few figures which I think are really quite interesting in this regard. And this is, you know, Trump, a member of the elite, demonises the elite, one of the things that he's played on, I don't think it'll be big in the election campaign, but he certainly has played on it, is the fact that nobody went to jail for Wall Street. Basically, ordinary Americans really wanted to see a long list of the jailed. And that's one of their sense of grievances that they have, that only one person was sent to jail for the various fraudulent activities and ill judgments that produced that financial crisis when it did. But here's 1985 and now. Confidence in the president in 1985 was 52%. It's now 33. Banks, 51, now 28. Church, 66, now 42. Supreme Court, 56, now 32. Unions, 28, now 24. Big Business, 32, now 21. Congress, 39, now 8. That's Americans have completely walked away from their institutions, but there's two where this has not happened. Then police, 52, now 52. Then military, 52, now 77. So that shows you why so many of the people that you see speaking at these conventions who are new congressional candidates and the like, they're veterans, or else they're members of police forces. Increasingly, it's seen as a useful thing, if you happen to be a candidate in contemporary terms, to have that in your background as you approach the possibilities of election to Congress. But it does reflect in a certain attitude that develops in the legislative institutions, and you start to see an increasing number drawn from those areas. So the collapse of confidence in institutions is largely a product of the collapse of the economic experience of working class Americans. Working class Americans, white working class Americans, have not had a real wage rise for over 30 years. In that same period of time, the equivalent class in Australia has seen its income increase 2.5 times. Now, in 1983, the average household was worth $77,890 in 2014 dollar terms. 2007, that had risen to $137,955. Is now $82,756. The average household is basically back to where it was in the mid-1980s. For the white working class community, questioned on whether or not you think your child will do better than you did, over 55% say no, they won't. Our children face no future at all. For blacks, that is 45. For Hispanics, it's 30. So the white working class is basically shattered. And it's interesting to see how the Republicans tried to appeal to them. About 18 months ago, I used to have these sort of little sessions with political types, a sort of Grange steak and cigar event, usually with only one or two of them, because you don't want to ever give that more than one bottle of Grange. But the ones I loved were the former governor of Mississippi, a fellow named Hilary, who also became chairman of the Republican Party. He's a very smart man. But if you ever see that movie, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, he looks just like that guy. Talks just like that guy, but for all I know, dances as well as that guy. But that's Haley Barbour. And he asked, what do you think of us Republicans? I said, listen, tell you what I think, Haley, it's this. You're now the party of the white working class. And I hate to say that because I used to lead a party that represented that class in Australia and still does. I contest the ground all the time with the Liberals. But you now represent them all. You've done it on the basis of what you assume to be their social attitudes: guns, gays, abortion, and so on. And basically, that's true. They do think somewhat like you. But you don't represent their economic interests. And that is going to be more important than in the future. And sooner or later, you're going to find yourself with a populist candidate coming into your presidential race who's going to rip the guts out of the Republican Party. Now, I never thought it would be Trump. Trump is just simply not the vehicle, except in one sense, a completely brilliant sense of how he reaches over the normal discourse in the free-to-air media to shift it his way. He is a genius at it. And so a guy who was associated with the Gotti family in New York as he started off his work, became a notorious fraudster dealing with subcontractors whom he'd only paid 2/3 of what he was contracted to them, and then invite him to sue him for the rest, and an organiser of 4 bankruptcies. And if you organise a bankruptcy, you're a fraud. And then a university which has simply stolen money. To portray himself as a viable presidential candidate is a truly extraordinary thing. But he's up against the Democrats who are completely useless at sort of dealing with those areas, just roll with the punches while Hillary's insulted, and they throw nothing back. But that's just the Labor Party here too. So there's nothing particularly unusual in that. I suppose that's a sort of universal phenomenon. But they've got a bit better at it in the last federal election. But generally speaking, that he just gets away with it. But there's that brilliant. I just looked at it on the screen before I came here this evening. Ted Cruz was on. Ted Cruz is the last of the resistance, and he went down with the hall howling and baying at him. I'd howl and bay at Ted Cruz too, but for other reasons. But he was not going to go out endorsing Trump. He was not going to even appear in it, and Trump had expected that. But, and of course, that set the mob baying on the floor. But Trump came out on the floor, settling them down. Trump, the peacemaker, the unifier. Brilliant. No candidate has ever done that. But he was out there, a man who's actually encouraged violent discourse around his rallies. And there are a bunch of people outside the convention centre playing into his hands while they demonstrate against him by burning American flags. The left, as usual, is working overtime to elect a right-wing extremist. But, or maybe they know a thing or two about him that make them a little more acceptable, make him a bit more acceptable. Because I cannot think of a demonstration more conceived to be so stupidly supportive of him than that. One even suspects, given the cleverness of the man, that he's paying for it. But that's the guy is that brilliant manipulator of the social media. So the question now arises, will he win? And here we come to a much more problematic sphere. I don't actually think so. But so certain other statistics now start to come into play that are worth giving a bit of thought to. The first is one of the reasons why the white working class is so angry. And that is because whereas when Bill Clinton was elected as the president, 51% of Americans identified themselves as white Protestant. That figure is now down to 31. When Bill Clinton was elected, 87% of the American electorate was white. Last election, that figure was down to 72. This election, I think it'll come in at about 68. Romney actually polled a higher percentage of the white vote than Reagan to lose. Reagan polled a lesser percentage of the white vote to win. While it is true that the white working class have not been big voters, and now some of them started to enroll, that's recent. The last 4 years, the Hispanic community, not through the Democratic Party, but through their own social and religious organisations and their media, have been enrolling like blazes, because they noted that while 11 million of them voted last time, 23 million of them could. And there's also been some interesting additional movements, like from Puerto Rico, 1 million have moved into Florida in the last 4 years. And they're American citizens. They don't have to wait for citizenship to enrol. I think probably Florida's gone, as far as Trump is concerned, a big state and hitherto what they call a purple state. So these shifts, which have so amplified the hatred of the white working class for the situation in which they find themselves, are actually real, and they do have a political impact. So that means that lifts the percentage of the white vote that Trump really has to have. The majority of the American electorate is not male, it's female, by about 53 to 47. So while when we talk about the white working class, it's really the white working class man that I've been talking about. And sometimes we can get, but I'm a white man, not a working class man, but I'm a white man, and I sort of understand really the sense that these folk have. I don't share the view, but I can see in the conversations I've had in political life, most of my life has been spent campaigning amongst working Australians in the same background as my own. And you can sense and you fear when you see a view or an attitude develop, because you understand its cultural context absolutely. But that causes you sometimes not to see the wood for the trees. Because the views these folk have are views that are not shared by the others that we've been talking about, and not shared by women. So you've got a situation now where at the last election, 60% of single females voted for, okay, Doug, I didn't notice you down there, that's good, yeah. 60% of single females voted for Obama, and 55% of married females voted for Romney. Now, if, say for argument's sake, Hilary's presence creates some form of gender excitement, some form of it, and the percentage of married females who vote for Trump drops from 55 to 50, and the singles go up from 60 to 65, chances of Trump winning are negligible. And that's got to be out there in the mix of what it is we're discussing. The third thing is that gives me some degree of hope is the character of campaigning. Now, the success of the Labor Party here at the last election was built around its capacity to use social media, Facebook and all of this stuff, which generates, after you've done your proper data analytics, highly pitched messages to relevant groups. The Labor Party was done over only in one area. They missed the Chinese social site, and that caused them to lose Chisholm, because the Chinese they got a whole bunch of Chinese operators into that site that told that under the anti-bullying thing that is taking place in the Victorian and other education systems, that their boys would be obliged to wear girls' dresses and use girls' toilets. And that went through the Chinese social media, but it only impacted two seats really. Howard's old seat, while the rest of the western suburbs swung about 3 to 4% to Labor. The Liberal vote in Howard's old seat went up 10%. And here in Victoria, the one seat that went against the break was Chisholm, and a lot of Chinese also picking up the same set of messages. More generally, the Labor Party is a lot better on that. And modern data analytics are absolutely crucial in election campaigns in the US, where they don't have compulsory attendance at the polls, and where you really want to get a message in a way that teases people out to vote. Hilary has a huge organisation to both use the data analytics and exploit it. Trump has nothing at all. Trump may be right, but what Trump's view is when he's screaming desperate Republicans trying to get him to focus on what he ought to be doing in this regard, he says, listen, I don't accept a segmented electorate. I take the view that everybody more or less responds the same way, particularly if you're talking about wealth and national security concerns and terrorists and all that sort of thing, or trade or whatever. Doesn't matter whether you're a Hispanic background or African American or white, you all respond to those messages in the same way. And I want to use the capacity I have to shift agendas in the free-to-air media to win this next election. I don't need a ground game. So that's the fight that's still going on inside the Republican Party over whether or not they want to do what they did at the last election for Romney, to do it for Trump, or whether they allow Trump to proceed with what he wants to do. He also, however, if he's going to do that, he also has to have a decent, free, mainstream media advertising campaign. The mainstream media advertising campaign requires money and lots of it. In the 8 states that were contestable in the last election, the 2 campaigns spent $1 billion in the last 3 weeks. So that is a lot of money, and Hilary is well on the way to it. And she's already doing very effective negative advertising on Trump in the purple states. Trump will need money for that, and he has no money. He won't do his tax returns release, basically because he doesn't pay any tax. But it will not only reveal that he doesn't pay any tax, he basically has no income. And that will be, he's got a lot of assets, but no income. And that's going to be a difficult thing for him to reveal and explain to the public. So he just decided for the first time in 50 years that he is a major presidential contender, will not release his stats. And at least at this point in time, he might get embarrassed into it during the campaign, but at this point in time he won't. But it does mean that he needs money. That's the main reason I think he appointed Pence as his running mate. He doesn't like Pence. You can see that. I've got to interview this sort of unctuous little prat. I've got to present him as my running mate. I mean, there are certain attractive features of Trump. He doesn't like unctuous people, and really loathes the evangelicals. But nevertheless, he sort of has to have them along. The Conservatives that he also loathes. He has to sort of pander to. So they put him Pence. Part of it was because Pence talks to the evangelicals, which Trump emphatically doesn't. Part of it is because Pence is associated with the Koch brothers, one of the big funders of the Republican Party. I think they put into the Romney and associated campaigns last time around about $400 million. So there's method in his madness in pointing this unctuous prat in his mind as his vice presidential running mate. He could have appointed Newt Gingrich, who was a man much more to his taste, but had 2 old buzzards with 6 wives between them standing. It was probably a bridge too far for even that section of the electoral base that you don't mind insulting. But it's a problem for Trump, the evangelicals. The evangelicals are a bit different. He's been running the wrong evangelicals at this convention of his. He's been running the prosperity evangelicals. Those who say that if you tithe to your church, you can guarantee that you'll be leading a prosperous life. But God will anoint you and then bless you with a substantial income. Mainstream evangelicals absolutely hate that. They see that as a gross distortion of biblical teaching and an insult to Christian practice. And they absolutely despise those folk. Yet Trump is bringing them on as the main sort of evangelical speakers. Evangelicals are interesting. They basically don't vote. There's about 91 million of them in the United States, but only about 32 million are enrolled. And they set up, their churches function essentially as independent social organisms. You know, the Americans give 29 billion a year in overseas aid, which is in percentage terms quite low, but absolute terms the biggest in the world. But their private overseas donations exceed that. Their private charitable contributions overseas exceed the 29 billion. And when you look inside it, you find the reason why George W. Bush was so popular in Africa, almost as popular as Obama. The evangelicals have made Africa their cause. So these individual evangelical churches are essentially social entities within themselves, you know. If your husband dies and you're widowed, the church will rally around you and help you survive. If your husband leaves you or your wife leaves you, the church will rally around and make sure your kids are looked after. And they're really good social organisations. And then their projects in Africa, usually they'll adopt a village or a town and they'll pave it, they'll put the road in, they'll put in the wells, they'll put in the electricity, they'll build the schoolrooms, they'll build the health facilities, probably pay for staff in all of those, and they do it in huge numbers. So these are the evangelicals. They also have some other beliefs which are unusual, but there is they don't like the prosperity gospel, but they do, generally speaking, 32 million of them who vote do like the Conservatives. But you have to be a godly man or woman. And when they say it, they actually mean you have to be a godly man or woman. They tend not to be cynical. They tend to, they're forgiving, provided you admit sin. You don't actually have to live a life of blamelessness. They assume nobody does. But you have to seek forgiveness. That's why you see all these terrible signs of guys getting up, I've let my wife down, I've let my family down. The evangelicals respond to that. They accept it as part of the process. And so they will, but you actually have to do that. Just Trump would say, I don't think I've got anything to apologise to God about. Why would one do that? So he has a somewhat different view. I'm digressing here, but I said I've got a bit of time to. So the evangelicals are interesting on another front. So everybody talks about the Jewish lobby in the United States. There sort of is a Jewish lobby in the United States. It's those associated with AIPAC. They'd be about a third of the Jewish community. And they are quite conservative and they do support Netanyahu. The other 2/3 of the Jewish community are, amongst the white community, the most intense liberal voters. Provided you don't come out and say you want to perish Israel, they'll basically vote for it. If you are the most left-wing candidate, if you do espouse liberal values. About 25% of the whites are liberals, they're ideological liberals, and a large percentage of them are Jewish. And now, on the other hand, there is a section of the evangelicals who are believers in the rapture. And this constitutes something like about 15% of Americans. And that is that at a point of time, at the end of days, which will be within the next 30 or 40 years, the Lord is going to reach down to the streets and take up to him his anointed. He'll actually disappear. That's not the end of the story for you, though it's a good warning. Because what it suggests, if you're not one of these disappearing, is that you are going to get caught up in the final battle between the forces of Christ and the Antichrist. And that will occur around Megiddo. It will essentially be a battle fought, obviously, on Jewish territory. And at that point, the Jews will convert to Christianity. And they will join the forces of Christ to struggle in that final struggle with the Antichrist, and then Jesus will come down to judge us all. The irony of it all is that this is almost an identical story in almost an identical location in both ISIS theology, and 12 Shia philosophy. That is, we're also approaching the end of days. The ISIL people are looking to provoke a set of oppressions in the Western world that will cause the Western world to come to a place that's close to the north of Syria, not Medina, which is down in the West Bank, and further north, where the final battle will occur. And Baghdadi, who considers himself a Messiah, or if it's not Baghdadi, somebody else who is, will be joined by Jesus, and judgment will be passed on the rest of us for the utilisation of our performance on the faith. The previous president of Iran was a 12 Shia who also believed that the end of days were approaching, which made it acceptable to destroy Israel with nuclear weapons, because that's what one would do towards the end of days. But returning to the judgment will be done by the 12th Imam, hence 12. The 12th Imam disappeared, he didn't die, but he will return, and he'll return with Jesus. So Jesus gets a Guernsey in every one of these mythologies, which are so dominant, but not in there in the public mind, the issues with which we're now struggling, globally. It is basically in the United States the strong emphasis on support for Israel is not from the Jewish lobby, it's from the Christians, and it's from the evangelicals. And if it was just the Jewish lobby, it would be completely dissipated by the fact that 2/3 of the Jews would never vote for Conservatives, and therefore the best one that could hope out of it from the Republicans would be that third who tend to get in behind AIPAC, but not even then. Not even then. So those people have to be rallied to Trump, though, if Trump is going to have any chance of winning. When you look at all these things, when you look at all the gender balance of the American electorate, when you look at the distribution of the ethnic voters, a difficult course awaits Trump. Remember, it's the Electoral College, it's not the votes. Now, the Electoral College is what elects the president, and there is in the Electoral College what is called a blue wall. You need 270 electoral votes to win. The blue wall is those states which have supported the Democratic Party in the last 6 presidential elections. And they number in votes in the Electoral College 242. There are about 130, 140 votes in the purple states. And the Democrats only need 28 to win the election. When you look at Trump's performance in Florida, in Colorado, even in Arizona, which has been one of the red states to this point, but there are a lot of Hispanics, Nevada, which is supposed to be a marginal state, he has provoked the Hispanic community big. And if something more approaching 23 million instead of 11 million on the vote, that is going to be extremely hard for him to overcome. George W. Bush got 36% of the Spanish vote to win narrowly. Romney got 27% of the Spanish vote to lose narrowly. Trump is currently tracking at 12%. So there's now we may find that Trump is right and that everybody else in political campaigning has become wrong, but which will be an interesting thing to know in itself. But everybody else will have to be wrong for him to be able to win this one. Of course, if black swans settle on Hilary, who knows? One of the black swans just disappeared. That was the threat of an indictment. But there are others. Who knows what the next terrorist act will produce? It will be a terrorist assault in America, probably from lone wolves, every 2 or 3 weeks, between now and polling day. That's the world that we now inhabit. And one of these might just get big enough, but pretty interesting in Orlando. One of these might just get big enough to have a real effect on consciousness. The associated sniping of police officers that has started to become something of a social habit, that might develop and continue in the way in which it seems to be operating now, and were that to occur, that will start to create a different dynamic in the American electorate. There may be a recession. Recessions can come on quite quick, and there are softnesses in the American economy. That could create the circumstances that will elect Trump. He's still seen as stronger than Hillary, and he's seen as probably a better person for the economy than Hillary. These are narrow margins we're talking about here, but that's there. She's seen as better for unity, better in foreign policy, etc., but these things don't matter quite as much. Security, economic and physical. And Trump has an edge on it in that area. So, I'm as a bit of an optimist. I assume that she'll do all right, and she'll get there. And I like her enormously. I think she'd be a really good president, and she's probably the most qualified candidate to run for president in my lifetime. And she certainly deserves, to my mind, to win. She'd make a big difference to the US. Its effect on the Answers Alliance, if Hillary wins, nothing changes. Thanks very much.